Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, New York Gun Guys, episode number 2. My name is Taylor.
I'm John.
All right, and before we get into today's topic, I'd like to just make a correction to the last podcast, the episode number 1 podcast. I incorrectly referred to the Chinese Type 54 as a Type 33, T-33. That's the original Soviet variant, which it's the same gun, but technically correct is the Type 54. Just want to be correct here because I care enough about guns. I know. I listened to it after the fact and I'm like, ugh. Yeah, I'm sure all of our 2 listeners are going to be like, actually,
embarrassing. I think we have like 12 total downloads.
Okay, well.
But, 10 of those might have been me.
Might have been. Yeah. Last episode we talked about what we were going to talk about today was how to buy a gun in New York. But something more important came up.
Taylor discovered something and he brought it to my attention, and we just decided that it's probably better off we talk about this today.
And it's been around for a while apparently, and I guess with everything happening with COVID and coronavirus, it wasn't really put out there. It wasn't really that public, and just browsing Facebook and Reddit, I'm like, what the hell is this horse shit?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It is the John, what's the name of the bill that we got sitting in front of us here?
Well, this is Bill. It's in the New York, state of New York, in the assembly right now. It's going to be Bill 9903-A. Let's see, what's the name that they gave this bill? This is as of February 26th. There is a bill that's related to this. I forget the exact code that they gave it, but essentially they made one change, and then they it was on February 14th, and then they made the change, and then they kind of put this one back in on the 26th. So this is the same. It's the same bill minus one thing, which is pretty much useless. But Taylor, what's the actual name of the bill?
The name of the bill is the Jose Webster Untraceable Firearms Act. Oh boy! Ooh, untraceable.
Sounds scary. I'm scared just thinking about it.
Dude, I'm shaking right now, man. And it really does. It really does just play to the agenda, the anti-gunners, what they did in this bill, and how they named it, and what their ultimate aim is.
Well, I definitely think that just, I read over the bill, Taylor read over the bill. It's kind of sneaky.
It is.
It feels really sneaky to me. It is. I mean, it's like...
They're not banning the gun. They're banning the act of making the gun.
They're essentially turning you, and we're going to go over this in a little more in depth, but they're pretty much, if you put any parts of a gun together, you are now considered a gunsmith.
Right, and if you don't have a gunsmithing license issued by the state, you're now, what is it, a Class C felony?
It is a Class C felony, yeah. So you are now going to be, if you put a gun together, if you buy an 80% lower, for example, and you complete it,
in a compliant fashion.
Even in a compliant fashion, that's right. Just the mere putting together of the parts makes you a gunsmith under the law.
Right.
And, of course, you would be not licensed at that point. So...
New York State also has, I know there's a federal license, like an FFL for a dealer in firearms and a federal gunsmithing license. New York State also has a provision to where you need to be licensed at the state level in order to be a dealer in firearms and a gunsmith in firearms. I don't know. Some people don't know that. Some people just want to get, for example, an FFL and then realize if they want to sell handguns, you need a dealer's license. You need to go through all this process. You need to get fingerprinted.
So in reading the bill, it seems that they did put in that you don't exactly... You don't have to apply for you don't have to be a gun, a gun dealer.
No, you don't have to be a gun dealer. I was just saying it's a similar process.
You don't have to be a dealer in firearms to get a license in gunsmithing. Right. And we're going to go over that. So I guess you just want to start from Section 1 on this bill?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention was that who is Jose Webster? I mean, they named the bill after him, so I think he must be kind of an important guy, or he might have been some sort of important figure.
Sure.
Basically... Unfortunately, he was a 16-year-old kid that was shot and killed due to gang violence in 2011, apparently.
Now, was he in a gang himself, or was he just like an innocent bystander?
I don't know. A lot of people, a lot of the news articles I read about it just said he was walking home with a friend. 2 guys picked a fight with him, and then they shot him. I'm going to read a little snippet here from the New York Post from September 16, 2011.
Gotcha.
Headline is Bronx teen shot while walking girlfriend home.
Oh, in the Bronx.
Yep, in the Bronx.
Very nice.
Jose Webster, 16, and Anique Wallace, 16, I guess that's his girlfriend, were approached by 2 men on Teller Avenue near East 168th Street around 8:50 p.m. who picked a fight with them, and one of the assailants fatally shot him in the chest.
I'm sorry, what time were they walking home?
They were walking home at 8:50 8:50 p.m. 20:50
It's
hours.
not even that late.
No, it's not.
Interesting.
And the one thing which, because it's named the Jose Webster Untraceable Firearms Act, later on in subsequent news articles they found the killer. I'm not going to mention his name because we don't glorify killers.
Absolutely not.
There's no mention of even if he used a ghost gun. He was a gang member from the Mac Ballas gang. You know, whatever. The McDonald's gang. So he shot him, you know, allegedly. I think he was convicted, so I don't have to say allegedly. He was convicted of shooting and killing him.
Right.
And there's no mention as to if it was a, quote, ghost gun, end quote, or not. There's no mention of if it's an untraceable firearm. So what the left and the anti-gunners are doing here is they're using tragedy to push their agenda. And it's tragic that a young person was shot and killed. So just starting right at the top of that, it's already just, you know, the anti-gunners really just got their foot on it.
Right, and we don't even know if it actually was the result of a ghost gun.
Right, exactly. That's the whole thing.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so they're just using, you know,
they plucked the name.
Yeah.
They just plucked the name out.
Right.
Okay. I'm curious. We're going to have to look into that if he was actually...
From the news articles that I read, I couldn't find anything. And if I remember correctly, the killer alleged to have confessed to it when he was already locked up for another charge.
Okay.
So if I remember correctly.
I see, yeah.
So, yeah, it's not known whether there was even a ghost gun in it or not.
Okay.
So let's dive into it, John.
All right, yeah. So if anyone actually wants to follow along, if you have the bill in front of you, we're going to be looking at page 1.
By the way, it was written February 14th, 2020, the bill.
Correct, and then it was updated February 26th, 2020.
Right.
So we're looking at February 26th, 2020. It's Bill 9903-A, New York Assembly. So section 1 seems to it kind of just goes over like the term gunsmith. So it has the original term within the penal law, gunsmith. Means any person or a firm, partnership, corporation, company who engages in business repairing, altering, yada yada yada, firearms. And it's going to be for commercial use, right? They added a section B to that. So
on
now,
line 9.
Correct, yeah. So we're down on line 9. You'll see it says, or B, any person who assembles, manufactures, fabricates, builds, or fits together the components, parts of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun, regardless whether the firearm, rifle, or shotgun is intended for personal use, commercial sale, or for any other purpose. Gunsmith shall not include any person who performs routine cleaning or maintenance. So don't worry, under this law, you could still clean your firearm without being a criminal.
Right.
So yeah, like basically the point about this section here that they're adding is that whether this is for personal use or commercial use, you're now considered a gunsmith. So, if Taylor decides he wants to buy an 80% lower,
not even an 80%, but even just a serialized lower at that.
Right. So you can't buy anything and put it together.
Right.
Because now you just under the law you have become
a gunsmith.
And if
you're
which
not
is which is very interesting because you could buy a fully assembled gun. You can't put it together, but you could buy it. You're not a gunsmith, but you could take that gun completely apart and put it back together because you are maintaining it, and you're not a gunsmith all of a sudden. So it's just
basically what they're trying to do. The intent of this bill is they're trying to ban the hobby category or the supposed criminal element that circumvents gun laws in order to acquire a firearm. Well, newsflash, they're doing it anyway. Regardless of if it's an AR or a pistol or an 80%, they're still doing it anyway. And the fact is that in New York State, one of the easiest ways to build a compliant AR is to buy it in parts and put it together yourself. A lot of times dealers in New York upcharge just because they make it compliant, they fix the mag, they put a non-threaded barrel on it.
Right.
But if you get all those parts and you do it yourself, you save, number one, a crap load of money.
Right.
And you have the pride of knowing that you did it yourself.
Right. So they're basically eliminating that. They're saying, okay, now at this point, if you want to do that, you're considered a gunsmith, and now you have to go through all the steps to actually being a gunsmith under the law.
So if let's just say you do become a gunsmith, let's just say you apply for the license to become a gunsmith. What do you actually? Does that mean you could just build all of them you want? What do you have to do with that?
I mean, I have no idea. That it doesn't lay anything out like that.
Well, it actually does in the bill. What it says is that you have to. Let's just say you have an 80%. You're a gunsmith, and you mill
Right.
out an 80% into a complete firearm. You have to stamp it, engrave it with
Oh,
your
right,
own
right,
personal. Yeah, that's
well,
what I was
right.
getting
So what Taylor's getting at is, let's say you do create your own receiver, from a a block of steel, and you mill it yourself or
80%.
whatever. Like, let's say you even 3D print it. Now,
Right.
It has this. This is what they're considering a ghost gun, right? It's not serialized or
Right.
anything like that.
Which federally is legal to do. Build your own firearms. It doesn't have to have a serial number
Right.
for as long as it
Personal.
applies. Yeah, as long as it is compliant with NFA laws and whatever state law you're in.
Right. So what they're kind of getting at here is, and you can see later in the bill that you're actually, because as we all know, you do have to register your rifles now in New York State.
Well, you can't anymore. That's the whole thing.
Exactly. So as of right now, you have to register your rifles with New York State. However, in this bill, now that everyone's a gunsmith, only gunsmiths are going to be allowed to actually register those firearms. So let's say you had an 80% lower, right, Taylor? It's already serialized from the manufacturer or whatever.
Well, it's not even 80% lower. Like better
okay,
yet,
so any lower,
just
anything,
serialized.
anything.
You go to your gun shop.
Right,
You do
it's
a
already
4473. It transfers to you.
Correct.
You would have to give that to a gunsmith.
Right, like as of
have them build it.
Right now, as of this time, because this bill is not passed.
It passed the Senate.
Right, so you can, let's say you can buy that, you could build your gun out, and you could register it. Under this new bill, only gunsmiths can register firearms.
Well, just to clarify what you're saying, New York doesn't require registration of rifles, and the assault rifle registration is long over. But when the bill talks about registration of firearms, it basically says that a gunsmith has to register with the New York State Police as saying, hey, I created this gun with this serial number. So there's a record of it being built somewhere. So that's basically what it's saying with registration. In New York State, you don't have to register your normal compliant rifles, your normal compliant shotguns. Handguns have to be registered, and quote-unquote assault rifles had to have been registered by 2014. So this creates a registry for anything that a gunsmith builds. And like I said, it doesn't make a distinction between 80% with no serial numbers on it previously or a serialized firearm that you transfer via 4473.
I mean, it does say in here that it does define a ghost gun, and within there it does say like partly completed lower receiver. So those would, in theory, could be already stamped and serialized.
Yeah, but then it's superseded by the fact that it says if you do any sort of assembling, fitting, component parts, then So
whether you buy this receiver already serialized or
like
you are milling your own or whatever, at this point, it's you're a criminal. You're a felon.
Class C felony.
Okay.
Still a felony. Now this also gets into, John, I don't know if you ever seen the others, the rifles that the firearms that people are building in New York. They're short barreled with a pistol brace, vertical grip up in the front. Have you ever seen those?
I don't think I've seen one. You have mentioned it to me before.
They're really fascinating, and this bill basically is banning those as well because you're assembling a firearm.
Right.
It's not a rifle, it's not a shotgun, and for those people who don't know, basically it's kind of like if you ever see the short Remingtons or the Mossberg Shockwave, it's a firearm, it's not a shotgun because it fits within these weird legal definitions on a federal level. New York State, the SAFE Act defines rifles, pistols, and shotguns, but it doesn't define firearms. So people, what they have been doing, which I don't know if it's 100% or not, but it's apparently within the letter of the law, have been building firearms out of transferred, legally owned, lowers, or even 80% lowers that they've been building themselves and making, quote, legal firearms. It has to have an overall length of 26 inches, has to have a vertical grip, can't have a stock, and it's basically a workaround to New York State's, semi-auto laws, which this bill will also aim to, nullify your ability to build those.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at, I'm just reading over my notes here. Like, if you look at going on to page 2, for example, here, this is going to be, I guess, subsection 11. It's going to be on line 7. It just says such person is not a gunsmith duly licensed pursuant to the section 400 of the chapter and possesses a ghost gun, provided that, and it kind of gives a grace period here of 6 months.
Oh, thank you.
Where if you do own one of these, you do have
to get
6
it
months.
To a gunsmith.
Well, no, you could be in possession of it, correct, and and you're not a felon yet.
Right, but you have to get it to a gunsmith in order to get it built before you're a felon.
Well, you could have it. And you could have it already built. You could have built this already, right? And it's not serialized, let's say. So you do have 6 months to bring it somewhere, get it serialized, and get it correct.
With the state police.
So basically, to have possession, quote unquote, of a ghost gun in what they describe, you must be a gunsmith, right? You have to be a licensed gunsmith now. Right. So under the bill, anybody that does any work on a gun, again, you're now considered a gunsmith.
And it's not even AR-15s, I feel like, because let's just say, John, you have
it's gonna be a
Mossberg 500, and one has a rifled barrel that you use for deer hunting, and the other's a slug barrel that is just smoothbore. Well, if you fit or refit the components of a firearm, and a barrel is a major component of a firearm, it's a pressure-bearing component.
Right.
Does that mean that just by you changing out a barrel, it's not routine maintenance or cleaning?
Right.
Because it's a gun for a completely different purpose.
Sure. But now,
try enforcing that shit.
Right, and I mean, it doesn't. Really try enforce any of this.
I know.
We already have the New York Safe Act, which I don't think I've really ever seen. I mean, and
there was like a couple of arrests, but it was just tacked on because people who got, let's just say, an illegal handgun in New York City, which had a 30-round magazine in it or some shit.
Right. So that's kind of the point. Like, how many people do you think out there have 30-round magazines? And they're and you can see it on social media. That there are people out there in New York who do have these magazines.
The non-compliance rate in New York was very high.
Right. So it's already not being. No. I mean, who's really, unless the only time I've ever seen anything like this actually charged is if there's like a very large quote unquote gun bust, and it has, and there's a lot of mean looking firearms there, right? An arsenal,
he has
right?
500 rounds of 22 long rifle,
right? There's like 3 guns on the table, and then and it's an arsenal, and then they say, oh, in violation of the New York Safe Act and assault rifles. Yeah, I mean that's really going to be the time. I have not heard of any law enforcement agency going and looking for people who. Not even going to look for people, but just being somewhere and seeing someone who's non-compliant and doing something about it.
It's usually added on after the fact if somebody has domestic violence issues, or if they have, they're trying to sell illegal firearms, or if they're quote-unquote illegal, of course. But it's just one of those things that the state now can tack on just to say, hey, we're going to bend you over with this now. And it's also a way that the state is going to basically bully law-abiding citizens into saying, well, now I can't do this, or now I can't do this because I'm going to follow the law because I'm a law-abiding citizen. Criminals, on the other hand, aren't going to care. They're still going to build, ghost guns or whatever, quote-unquote ghost guns. More than likely, they're going to get their guns from, the streets, the black market, from interstate commerce, federal interstate commerce, which is breaking many state laws by transporting guns across state lines, selling it illegally. It just blows my mind when this kind of stuff comes up and people just are like, what the fuck? I was telling some people I know about this bill because I just kind of came across it last week, and they're like, really? Like, what? I never heard of this. Like,
and that's scary because I'm friends with a lot of people who are super pro Second Amendment, and they're very against like any type of legislation, and
I'm very much so against this.
Right, and they talk about they post on social media like different laws that are affecting 2A, but I haven't seen anything about this, and
barely.
I mean, it's quiet, man.
It's really quiet.
Usually,
and it's gotten
like that
far. It passed the Senate, man.
Yeah.
I think it's like 2 more steps, and it's on Cuomo's desk.
I mean, have you seen anything about it on from the NRA or anything like that?
No, I haven't. And you know what? I think COVID is partially like a mask to cover up, because everyone's using COVID as an excuse now for whatever, business is slow, or we're down capacity now because of COVID. I feel like people were really focused on more important, not that this isn't important, but people were out of work, people were really hurting for money, businesses were closed.
Right.
I feel like they did this at the right time in their eyes. When people were looking the other way, dealing with life and problems, they're just like pushing this through.
Well, you know, I mean, there is a famous quote: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." You know, so.
But it wasn't even a crisis, man. It's a manufactured crisis of alleged untraceable firearms. You know, at the end of the day, if a gun...
Well, no, I just mean like the COVID crisis.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so like,
sure.
I mean,
You
look,
know.
I'm sure it's no accident that something like this is being. I mean, you know, not diving into conspiracy theories or anything. I'm not saying that COVID was manufactured just so they could push gun control.
No.
Obviously, we're not saying
It was
that.
just taken advantage of.
Right. Again, never let a good crisis go to waste. So they kind of see an opening where there's a lot going on in the world right now between COVID, between the protests, which are, you know, popping up as riots and all these Chaz zones and people getting really badly hurt in all these places. You know, the hate against law enforcement right now. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the news. You know, it's an election cycle. We're getting really close. I know there's a lot of stuff. And this is like so far at the bottom of the list for people because they're being bombarded by so much shit all day long. So,
everything else, man.
You know, it's a good time. It's a good time to introduce something.
Oh,
like
it
this.
really is. The last good time to introduce major gun control legislation was right after Sandy Hook, and you know, look what happened. That passed. You know, in the middle of the night, no hearing, no public vote
and
on it.
That was the SAFE Act, right?
Yeah. Emergency legislation needed to be signed right now.
Right.
And you know what? We're still dealing with the after effects of that. You know, hey, we're going to get this ammo background check system in place. Oh, feds, what do you mean we can't piggyback off your 4473 NICS system? Oh, we have to create our own system?
Right.
Yeah, we're not going to do that, but we're not going to repeal the law either.
Right.
So we're going to leave it in this ambiguous gray zone.
Well, yeah, because it's going to be one of those things where it's like they can just use it at any time now.
Right. Oh, yeah. They can just whip it out and be like...
You had all this ammo. Where was your background check? Oh, there's no way to do it? Oh, well, then you shouldn't have bought it because it's against the law.
Right. And you know what? Now with this act that's going on, the Jose Webster Untraceable Firearms Act, it's just going to be another one of those things where they're going to ram it through, they're going to sign it, and it's just going to be one of those things. How could you prove if a gun was built by you or bought, or, you know, if you have a gun with an Anderson lower, you know, I mean,
right.
Prove that I assembled it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's really what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. And unfortunately, now the AR-15 has been demonized in our society, and the politicians are going to are going after that gun right now. It's just a really a gun is a gun, no matter what. So now there was also another law that New York State was pushing through. I believe it was the guy's name. He was a teacher that died on Long Island. He was a teacher that died in the Parkland shooting. It was a bill that was attached to this. I believe it was the Joseph Biegelman Firearms Act or something like that. And basically, what happened was Parkland shooting, the high school shooting. It was really tragic. The killer bought his gun from a gun store, shot up a bunch of people, shot up the school, and then was arrested and now is in jail. New York, this act I think replaced that one, but the other one, I believe that the person's last name was Biegelman, and he was from Long Island. He was a teacher at the school who died trying to protect the kids, and the mother of the person who was killed is now a very pro-anti-gun activist. She speaks on behalf of the anti-gun lobby and is donating to, Democratic politicians. They named the bill after him.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me at the moment because this was more pressing.
Right.
Because it was basically tacked onto this.
Gotcha.
But anyway, they named the bill after her son who passed away in Florida. Not because of ghost guns, not because of untraceable firearms, but because of a deranged criminal lunatic who wanted to inflict harm on society and kill innocents.
Right.
So, again, pulling at your heartstrings, trying to demonize the gun, trying to demonize anything they can to push their anti-gun agenda.
Yeah, I mean, in all politics, there's a lot of emotion. Emotion's a huge part of politics. I mean, that's how you get votes one way or, going one way or the other, right?
Right.
So no matter what it is, there's going to be an element of emotion involved, and look what happened to this person. This should have never happened, because if we had this legislation about preventing X, Y, and Z with guns that are built in the home, then we could have prevented it and this would have never happened. Look, it would have happened either way. Okay, it would have happened whether it was one type of gun or another, or a handgun or a rifle or a shotgun or a bomb or a knife, or it could be anything.
Right. So what else does the bill say? Is there anything additional?
Yeah, so we're still on page let's see, we're going to be on page 2. Let's jump down to line 20. And this just kind of defines ghost guns for, or what they're saying, like what types of receivers are going to be considered ghost guns. So the existing penal law says, for the purpose of this section, unfinished frame or receiver means a piece of any material that does not constitute the frame receiver of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun, but, and this is the part that was added, but that has been shaped or formed in any way for the purpose of becoming the frame or receiver or for a firearm, rifle, or shotgun, in which may be readily made into a functional frame or receiver through milling, drilling, or other means. Basically, I think this is just saying that, if you have like a block of metal,
right,
in the shape of whatever, it could readily be made into, technically an unstamped receiver of some sort.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I found the act, the bill. It got taken over basically by this bill, but it was the Scott J. Beagle Unfinished Firearms Receivers Act. And it didn't go anywhere in the Senate. This bill took it over, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But
Gotcha.
it was sponsored by Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and it was in the news in February that Moms Demand Action, every town, applaud legislation to prohibit ghost guns named in honor of victims of gun violence.
Right.
So it's not even victims of specific gun violence. It's just gun violence named after victims of gun violence.
They're picking names off the tree.
Exactly.
Of,
So
unfortunate.
I had to do a little Google foo while John was talking, because I really wanted to bring it up. He was from Long Island, and it's very tragic that this person passed away trying to protect kids from a madman with a firearm.
Right.
But unfortunately now they're using him as a martyr, and his mother is using his name to try and ban our rights and ban guns.
Right. And look, we're not saying that. Look, I mean, it comes down to, she obviously went through something pretty traumatic.
Oh, of course.
Right. We're not saying that she's a bad person.
No, I'm not saying that
at all. Look, I mean, everybody out there, it's your right to not like firearms. It's your right to not want to own a firearm. I mean, I'll even argue it's your right to make a case for why other people shouldn't own firearms. But just because you don't like firearms, you don't believe that they should be there, I mean, it doesn't give you the right to take away that right from people who also have the right to enjoy their firearms and enjoy everything, the sport of shooting or protection. Or
it's in our Constitution. It's not like it's a privilege. It's not like it's driving a car. And unfortunately, people get really, really emotional about it.
Very sensitive topic.
Yes, very sensitive, which it really shouldn't be. Because just like your right to religion, your right to free speech, your right to be secure in your persons or property, nobody really questions those rights. But they question your right to own a firearm. And that to me is really asinine. You don't have to own a firearm if you don't want to. But the Second Amendment to the Constitution says that I can own a firearm, and you can't tell me otherwise.
Right.
Just like I can't tell you can't say and do what you want.
Right. Just like we can't make you own a firearm, you can't make us not own a firearm.
Exactly.
That's pretty much what we're saying, and I think everybody has the right to feel exactly the way they want to feel, right?
Yeah.
If you don't like guns, you're not a bad person.
No.
We're not saying that at all. But, don't look at us and say, well, you like guns, so you're a terrible human being,
Exactly.
which is
You're
lot of the
reason
time.
That children are dying
right,
all
and
across
a lot of the
this country.
time. And I'm not saying this for everybody, but sometimes when you say, look, I'm pro-gun, people look at you like you're fucking nuts.
I know.
And they're like, how could you be for guns? They're a terrible thing. Yeah, well, they exist, unfortunately, and the only
humanity is worse than inanimate objects.
Right.
So continue.
Continuing down in the same area here. So we were just looking at section 256.07 subsection 1. We just went over that defines like the unserialized receivers as receivers now, which I guess under the law they weren't, right?
No, so, they were still firearms, but now they define them
as actual receivers,
having to need to be serialized.
Subsection 2 right below that just goes into saying that a gunsmith shall engrave, cast, stamp, or otherwise place a unique serial number on that receiver. And now this is kind of where this comes into play with everybody now being a gunsmith under the law. Only a licensed gunsmith is allowed to stamp those receivers with a serial number.
Right, and they're...
So this is kind of where it all ties in. This is kind of like that sneakiness, you know,
Right.
like they're saying, well, you know, a gunsmith is the one that has to register, that has to stamp your receiver. So, right. So like you're thinking, oh, that's not too bad. I can build it in my basement, right? I can go to a gun store. I can get it stamped and do what we have to do with it. No, because this law has now made every single person that puts two pieces of a gun together into a gunsmith, you're now an unlicensed gunsmith in New York State, and only a gunsmith can stamp a serial number.
And it's not even that. And it's just also saying that you can't have a gun without a serial number. So even if the gunsmith builds a gun for you, it has to be serialized. And then that serial number that the gunsmith puts on with their personal identification marks has to be submitted to the New York State Police for registration.
Right.
It's similar if anybody in free states that happens to be listening deals in the NFA world. If you make your own suppressor at home, you have to put, you know, identifying marks and a serial number. If you get a short-barreled rifle done, the gunsmith has to put their identifying marks and a serial number, and then that information gets sent off to the ATF. Similar process, but obviously we don't get the cool stuff like the rest of the country does.
Right, and then going right below that, as Taylor said, this kind of goes into the registration aspect. A gunsmith shall register with the Division of State Police any firearm, rifle, shotgun, finished frame or receiver, or unfinished frame or receiver that he or she has manufactured, assembles, or causes to manufacture or assemble, and it goes on and on and on. But we're just saying that, you know, that first line, a gunsmith shall.
Right.
So that's not, you
Shall.
know,
That's...
right, a gunsmith. So now everyone's a gunsmith now. Every single person under this law is a gunsmith. If you put two pieces, you know, if you put the parts of a firearm together,
Right,
you're now a gunsmith.
parts of a
and,
firearm.
Right. And a gunsmith, duly licensed gunsmith, is the person who has to stamp it and register it.
Right.
So you can't do it.
No.
Right. So.
And you know what? That's very unfortunate, because even if they made a clause that said, hey, we don't want ghost guns in New York, you have to put some sort of serial number on the gun. And, you know, people be like, well, you know, maybe that's not the end of the world if I just have to stamp a serial number.
Right.
But the fact is if I build a gun from an 80% receiver and stamp a serial number on it, it's still untraceable because nobody knows that I put that serial number on it.
Right.
I could put FUAC 0001.
Right.
You know?
And well, that's part of the reason why they're creating a registry now, because now they can take that firearm and run that. Let's say you stamp 1234 as the serial number on the gun you made in your basement. Now they can back check that with the registry that they want to create here, and effectively see, okay, well, you stamped this essentially, or nobody stamped it, right? Technically, no gunsmith, quote unquote, a licensed gunsmith, I should say, stamped it or registered it, which would now make you a felon. In fact, any gunsmith who fails to comply with the provisions that we just talked about shall be guilty of a Class C felony.
Yeah, the big F word, the felony, man. That's a big one.
And that's scary for a lot of people, man. I mean, it should scare everybody, I think.
But yeah, felonies are big deals, man. That prohibits a lot of people with good intentions from doing it. You know, it prohibits a lot of people who might be the hobbyist, who might build their own guns, who might, you know, there's plenty of other guns besides ARs that get built from unfinished frames or receivers. A lot of people make semi-auto versions of submachine guns from parts kits, Sten guns, Papa-Shahs, PPS-43s. They build a lot of them. Uzis, people build semi-auto Uzis. You know, not necessarily in New York. You can technically if you make it compliant, which is kind of impossible to do for some of these things. But let's just say you're a law enforcement officer and you have the ability to have, quote, assault weapons, and you're a hobbyist and you like building historical, you know, semi-auto replicas of famous submachine guns. You know, well, now you can. A gunsmith has to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I mean, that takes away the whole interest of doing it yourself. And it's going to cost you a crap load of money.
To get the actual license.
No, not even do that, but sometimes just to send stuff to a gunsmith. I mean, little shit.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they won't charge you for it. But if you have like a custom job, like I said, if you want to build like a semi-auto Uzi and you were doing it at home and whatever, and now you have to send it off to a gunsmith to do. They're going to charge you for welding.
What's crazy is you can go out and buy all these pieces.
Yeah.
Have them in a box.
Yeah.
Next to each other, right? And then you could drive that box to a quote unquote gunsmith, right? Let's just call it a real gunsmith,
right? A licensed gunsmith.
Real, not necessarily under this bill, but a gunsmith,
an actual gun shop, an FFL, a gunsmith,
right.
Somebody,
right? Yeah. And then they could put it together, and that's okay. But if you take those same parts and put them together, then you're a felon.
And I like how it doesn't make a distinction in the law between serialized and unserialized finished receivers. Like, for example, like we were talking about earlier, if you just get a regular, Poverty Pony Anderson lower, an AR-15 lower, and you transfer to you in a 4473, technically, by you assembling component parts of that firearm, you're breaking the law.
Well, I think that would be under the section of unfinished frame or receiver.
Well, because
it's unfinished.
Well, unfinished by what standard? Manufacturing or unfinished by component parts? And that's where it's really ambiguous. Mm-hmm. And that's why I said, unfinished could be, hey, it doesn't have the trigger in it. Or unfinished could be, it's an 80%, you need to mill it out. Mm-hmm. I get that they're talking about ghost guns, but the ambiguity of the law really leaves a lot to be open. It leaves a lot to be desired. There's a lot of open ends on this.
Right.
So the way I read it, the way I interpret it was an unfinished frame or receiver could mean unfinished as in physically unfinished, or unfinished as in not completed. Right. Like not the component parts, trigger, the stock,
right.
The upper, the barrel.
And I didn't see any definition of that anywhere.
Exactly. We read the bill. And that's why I believe my interpretation of law. Again, we're not lawyers. We're just reading the bill, giving our interpretation, our thoughts on it. You guys have to read it yourself, and really, if you need any additional information on it, consult maybe some lawyers or something, which we all have to kind of be in New York anyway. But, the way I read it was that even just a normal 4473 that's transferred to you, from a gun shop is provisioned under this, is included in this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does say here, an unfinished frame or receiver means any material that does not constitute the frame or receiver of a firearm. I mean, that is such a confusing line, right? How does this make... For the purpose of this section, quote, unfinished frame or receiver, end quote, means a piece of any material that does not constitute the frame or receiver of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun, but that has been shaped, formed in any way. So, I mean, it kind of sounds like they're not talking about...
Finished.
I mean, it kind of just... It really... I mean, at least for me, this subsection kind of feels like it's talking about...
80%?
Yeah, I mean, something that... Because it does lay out, like I said before, which may be readily made into a functional frame or receiver through milling, drilling, or other means.
Right.
So, it's... I mean... the wording is confusing on purpose.
Oh, it is. But getting back to the first part that we read, it just basically, it says, any person who assembles, manufactures, fabricates, builds, or fits together the component parts of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun, regardless of whether a firearm, rifle, or shotgun is intended for personal use, is a gunsmith. So,
right. So either way,
they define firearm, and if
right,
you already
so either
have
way.
the 4473 transfer to lower, which is technically a firearm, if you assemble anything onto that, felony.
Right.
Bam.
Because you're a gunsmith now, and you're not licensed.
As a gunsmith.
Jumping down to the bottom of the page, 256.10 of the penal law, they added subsection 8. Any person other... So this is kind of important. This is kind of where it defines that you have to be licensed, right? Mm-hmm. So it says any person other than a gunsmith duly licensed. So now, don't forget, everyone's a gunsmith now, okay? Everybody's a gunsmith now, and now this subsection is saying that you have to be licensed. So any person other than a gunsmith duly licensed pursuant to section 400 of this chapter who assembles, manufactures, fabricates, builds, or fits together the component parts of a firearm, rifle, shotgun, other than for the purpose of performing routine cleaning or maintenance.
Turn page.
It pretty much just says for non-commercial. Oh, so this is kind of important. It says maintenance on a lawfully possessed firearm, rifle, or shotgun for non-commercial purpose is guilty of a Class C felony. So this is basically saying, this is where it defines you're a gunsmith, you're not licensed, and it's pretty much any gun for personal use, because
Right,
it says non-commercial, right? So I mean,
Not for
that's
resale,
right. That's kind of the way. I mean, that for me, really, when I read that, I was like,
That
wow,
was-
that's, them putting in there that non-commercial, because I mean, up until this bill was put in, you could, like you were saying earlier, you could make an unserialized gun, and it would be okay, because it would be for personal use.
Yeah, federal law states that you could build a firearm for personal use as long as it complies with all NFA laws and state laws, localities, etc., not have to be serialized or stamped with any identifying marks. The only time it would have to be is if it's sold. So you have to put some sort of identifying marks in order to sell it, which you're not really supposed to do anyway, but, shit happens. It's your gun, you could sell it, you got bills to pay, whatever.
Right. So on the rest of that page, we're on page 3. I mean, it kind of just, they add a bunch of subsections, and some of these are exceptions, for like the 6-month grace period, for example.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
it does lay out
Give me
some,
6
right.
months.
It lays out some ways that you could be guilty of, of certain Class C felonies, and those are definitely worth, I guess, reading into if you decide to, if this bill becomes law, if you decide
If you feel like being a felon in 2020,
exactly.
this law's for you.
That's it, exactly. So if you are planning on breaking the law, you might want to read that, because you might want to know what you're getting into. Right.
Yeah.
So at the bottom of page 4, I'm just kind of reading over what I circled here.
There's a lot to this law. It's a lot of legalese. It's a lot of... I mean, to be frank, it's just a lot of bullshit. I'm not going to beat around the bush on that one. There's a lot to go over, and, John's just sitting there with papers in hand, notes. He's got the edges of the paper marked up with notes, and it's just one of these things where I kind of feel like sometimes I beat this horse to death when we say New York passes crap laws, New York does this, New York does that, but this is really a crap law. This is really meant, because you know what, if you have a handgun and you're going to commit crime with it, whether it's a ghost gun or not, regardless, you're committing a crime. You're going to go shoot somebody. You're going to go do something illegal. If you're building firearms to circumvent background check laws, you're committing a crime. You're circumventing background check laws. If you're building rifles that are unserialized in order to sell them on the black market, you're committing a crime. So why add on more laws that only hurt people who build law-abiding firearms, people who abide by the law? Why hurt them?
Right. Well, because we all know that, I mean, laws in general only apply to law-abiding citizens, but, it's, not to beat a dead horse here, but,
this horse is
gun control laws only apply to the, only apply to the law-abiding citizen.
Right.
So down at the bottom of page 4, this section kind of just says in plain English that you cannot assemble a firearm unless you're licensed, in New York State as a gunsmith. So I'll read it though. It says, no person shall engage in the business of gunsmith, which we all now are gunsmith, or dealer in firearms, nor, and this is where they added this portion, nor assemble, manufacture, fabricate, build, or fit together the component parts of a firearm, rifle, shotgun, other than for the purpose of performing routine cleaning and maintenance. Again, you're allowed to take the whole thing apart
and put it back together.
And put it back together, and that's okay, right? 'Cause that's maintenance.
Right.
On a lawfully possessed firearm, rifle, shotgun for non-commercial purposes, aka personal guns, unless licensed pursuant to this section. So
they put lawfully possessed in there. If the gun's already lawfully possessed, then what the fuck does it matter? If it's already yours, it's already lawfully possessed. It doesn't matter how it came to be in existence.
Right. I mean,
and I guarantee you, this will stop nothing. This will stop no crime. This will stop no one. No one criminal will stop putting together a ghost gun, and be like, damn.
Yeah. No, I don't think anybody who wants to do this, I mean, they're going to do it.
Right, regardless. Or they're just going to go to a store and buy a gun and then go commit whatever acts they're going to commit with it.
Right.
That's my whole thought.
It's laws like this that just, I don't know, it's weird. It's like, do they really think that it's going to make a difference?
like you said in the first podcast, they think we're fucking stupid.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, look, there's plenty of stupid people out there, but
There are.
I mean,
And undoubtedly, this, if it gets to Cuomo's desk, it will be signed.
I don't know though, because it does bring up that question of a registry.
It doesn't matter. The fact is, Cuomo would love a registry. Oh
Well,
my
I know,
God,
but
King
as far
Cuomo?
as, I mean, it's definitely gonna get, if it does pass, it's definitely gonna
passed
get
the Senate,
challenged.
man.
Well, yeah, but if it becomes law, it's gonna get challenged.
It's not going to get it. People are going to try and challenge it, but the courts aren't going to take it up. Look at all the stuff that was challenged with the SAFE Act. The only thing that was overturned with the SAFE Act was the 7-round magazine provision.
Mhm.
Because the 7-round, that's an arbitrary, that's a bullshit number.
Right,
They don't
it
make
is.
7-round mags. It's either
Right.
5 or 10 usually.
Right.
So, you could have your 10 rounds, but you could only load it till 7.
Right.
You know,
And how do you even enforce that? I mean, it's crazy.
Exactly. So that was, I believe, the only provision of the law that was challenged,
Mhm.
and we're still living with it since 2013,
We're
man.
gonna be living with it. I mean, I don't think that's ever going away.
It's never going to
It's
go away.
never going away. Not in New York.
And
it's not going
that
away.
is the crappiest thing.
I mean, even if, like, let's say, a Republican gets elected, they're not getting rid of it. I don't see a world where it would happen.
I don't think so either.
Not that I think a Republican would ever.
No.
Well,
I mean,
never
there
say
were in
never,
the
right?
past,
But never say never. But I know.
we were promised a lot with a Republican president and a Republican controlled Congress, but I think we were severely let down with a lot of things, gun rights related issues. There was a lot of things like the Hearing Protection Act that was supposed to deregulate silencers from the NFA registry to be transferred as regular Title I firearms.
Mm-hmm.
They were supposed to try and gain traction with the National Carry Reciprocity. So if you have a carry in Tennessee, you can go just like a driver's license or just like any other right that you have in this country.
Mhm.
You can go across state lines.
Right.
If you license to carry, then you're
Right.
fine. We were really let down on that, and I think a lot of times now, I think the best thing you could do with this is, like, I didn't know about it. I had zero clue. And
Right.
I'm online, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I follow a lot of gun content. And this is also why we created this podcast, because nothing is specific to New York. I mean,
Right. Let's be fair. Any gun channel that is on a national scale,
Right.
they're not exactly interested in this. I mean,
No.
it doesn't apply to 90% of their audience.
It really
so I
doesn't.
can see where, even if it did come across their desk, they'd probably be like, well, that's New York, and that fucking sucks. But
the closest thing I see is like the subreddit New York Guns on Reddit,
Right.
And
Right.
that's one of the places where I saw it. I saw it on Facebook first, on a Long Island Firearms forum page group. And then I saw it on Reddit. I searched Reddit, and it was posted like a week ago. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I never heard of this. And this is why I think doing this podcast now,
Right.
like this episode of this podcast is so important. And
Right.
I really hope anybody that listens, our 5 people
Yeah,
that
guys,
listen,
like, share it. I mean,
tell people about it. Just say, you hear about this law that they're trying to pass?
it's hard.
Even if you're in Utah.
Right. I mean, it's hard for us to really super explain every single part in
The
in
minutiae
bill.
that
I mean,
firearms
it's
ownership
just
in
like
New
the,
York
the wording is so weird and backwards, and
I call it legalese.
right, yeah, and it's like, well, an unfinished fire or a frame and receiver is not considered an unfinished frame and receiver. Like, what is that? It's like, but it is this
Vague,
X, Y, and Z. If it can be
gray
milled
areas.
or it can be, popped out of a piece of cardboard, as like, it's like weird,
Right.
So it's worth you reading. I mean, I'm sure you can find it, and we actually did have. There's like a little PDF Taylor sent me, or a post that Taylor sent me that I ended up printing. That it kind of breaks it down.
Yeah,
I
it
guess
kinda highlights the important points,
it
like a
just says
summary.
like this. This section added this section added this, but it doesn't really break down like what's the impact of it. It does say that for example, subsection 1 made it so, like, if you put all the pieces together, you're a gunsmith. And later it says, like, okay, only gunsmiths can register. It's like, it's worth reading. Let me put it that way.
Exactly. And on the first page of the bill, John, it should say the sponsor of the bill. It's introduced by Senators Hoylman, Kaplan, Biaggi, Guandres, and Liu. So those are all the senators that sponsored this garbage legislation. So, I mean, like I said, sometimes you hear, oh, call your senators, contact your senators, email them, write them. I'm going to tell you to do that, but I know in reality
it's not going to make.
They're going to just throw it out. So what you really have to do is spread it around to people. If enough people know about it, if enough people know the details of this, if enough people get the information out there, it can spread, and it could be known that, hey, they're trying to do this. They're passing this.
Right.
And we need to do something about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I do support contacting your elected officials. You know,
of course.
But this you just reminded me of something. Like, I do know a person who lives in New York City, and you know, when all this like anti-law enforcement stuff was going around, and you know, this kid said to me, you know what, like, you know, he's a law enforcement supporter. He's like, you know what, I'm gonna write a letter. You know, to either one of the city council members or somebody in Congress, somebody who's elected, you know, in the city,
elected official.
And they wrote a long letter, and they got a response. It was a little pamphlet, and it was about COVID.
What the hell?
Right. So
really?
The response, right. So it was like, look, you know, I feel like we should really be, you know, backing our law enforcement. You know, we're talking about such a minority of cops who, you know, are doing the wrong thing, and we should really be pushing to back the blue. Not, you know, I live in the city. I don't want to defund the police. I feel safer when there's police. And this guy sends back. I'm not gonna say who it was, but this politician sends back a pamphlet on COVID has impacted in New York City. Like, are you what? You don't even even take the time. This person wrote you a letter, and you're the elected official in their district, and you don't have the time of the day, right? I mean, we're electing these people. They work for us. You'd
be better off sending you some Burger King coupons,
right? That's what I'm saying. I get a better response from when I have soggy fries at McDonald's. You know,
Publishers Clearinghouse.
Yeah, I mean,
sent you.
right? I got soggy fries. They sent me a coupon for a free large almost instantly.
Those ads that pop up on the porn sites with Mia Khalifa's face are more informative than that COVID packet.
Oh God!
But I think that we're so far
think
removed
it's sad,
from government officials.
It's just so sad.
It is. And sometimes there's a feeling of helplessness. Sometimes there's a feeling of hopelessness.
For me, it's a feeling of defeat, man. Like when you elect these people, and even if you did vote, you know, one way or the other, like let's say you voted, because I mean, you can be a Democrat and still be still be pro-gun, or the other way around for that matter. You know, if you take the time of the day to write somebody, and like you either don't get a response, I can even understand not getting a response, but like you get a response, and it's like not even about whatever you wrote them. It's like, dude, for me, that's like just utter defeat, like slap in the face.
Right.
Like, damn,
what can
like,
you do?
At that point,
go to this person's office?
Right. And like at that point, did you even read? Did they even read? Or did somebody in their office even read? Like, no, someone got the letter and they were like, well, just put them on the mailing list.
Yeah. So. I've been to protests at the Albany Capitol, the governor's mansion.
Right.
Back when there was when the SAFE Act was going to be passed. There was like 1,000 people. There was a crap load of people. Everyone carrying signs, people speaking. I have pictures of it. I felt really good after that. I'm like, you know what? We're at this guy's doorstep.
Right.
There's no way he cannot hear us. There's no way he cannot see that. And you know what? It got passed anyway.
It doesn't make a difference, man. It really doesn't.
I voted to get that you know, dictator out of office, and my vote I felt like didn't do anything. I'm going to keep voting. I'm not telling people not to vote, but this is why I think,
you know what, everyone says like, oh, New York will always be blue. New York will always be blue. That prevents a lot of people, right? I mean, that prevents a lot of people who vote red to not vote, right?
Right.
So, and you know, I've had loved ones of mine say, well, you know, what's the point? I always tell them, like, look, like voting in a local election is even more important than voting in a presidential election.
You don't like your high taxes? You think your school board sucks?
Right.
You think your sanitation guys suck? Vote them out.
Right. You have to vote. If every single person who would have voted, you know, red, let's say, voted, it might be pretty close.
If I remember correctly, the last election, the state was predominantly red, except for the
New York City.
New York City, and I think like one or two places upstate.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was predominantly red.
Right.
And that to me just shows the overwhelming.
It's the power of
right.
Right.
The rest of the state wants something. But a small, dense population of people living in the city say otherwise.
Right.
I think that it's something just to get awareness out now.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
So moving on, we're on page 5. We're gonna go all the way to the bottom.
Oh man, we're still going with this.
Yeah.
God.
I mean, listen, we have a.
Oh.
We're almost done. We got a couple pages left.
Oh,
We're gonna go a little bit over an hour today, but it's important stuff.
It is.
So down at the application section, this was kind of interesting to me, because this is where it lays out that you can actually apply for this gunsmithing license purely for the purpose to build, of building personal use firearms. So it does, it has the regular application stuff that's been there already, and then it adds, or for a person applying for a license as a gunsmith in order to assemble, manufacture, fabricate, build, or fit together, blah, 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 blah. More of the same, for non-commercial purposes. So to me, that's saying that, hey, if you want to do this, all you have to do is apply for the license, and they're going to give it to you to build, stuff in your. But like your reason can just be, I want to build personal firearms.
Right, but getting involved in that, the cost of doing so, the invasion of privacy. Is it
right?
worth
I mean,
it to build a couple of guns?
do have to. It does lay out in here that you do have to provide, your home address and where you're going to be doing this and your full name and all that stuff. Stuff that I mean, they realize as gun owners don't exactly like to give the government.
Right. It'd be more useful if you were actually in the business of being a gunsmith, or if you were being a dealer in firearms. Obviously, that is a completely different scenario. But if you're just a guy that wants to try and comply with this law, build a couple of firearms for his own personal use, for the average person, it's not worth getting a gunsmith license. And that's where they're banking on the fact that, do you think the criminals are going to be saying, hey, man, we could get a gunsmith license, we could crank these out?
No, but we're talking about criminals. Criminals, it doesn't make a difference anyway. But,
hence my satire.
Right, but for the law-abiding citizen who's, let's say...
Yo, Mac Ball is gunsmith, yo.
I mean, and then, even going further than this, now that, and this just kind of popped into my head because I'm sure somewhere out there, like, look, if I built an AR, 10 years ago, right? And now, I'm getting into my 30s or whatever. I have a kid, and I realize, like, I need some money. I can sell this firearm for, let's say, $1,000. Let's just say, let's throw the number out there. Am I allowed to sell this firearm now? Because I'm a, at what line do you become a dealer in firearms?
Well, you're only a dealer in firearms if you're engaged in the business of selling firearms. So if you make a substantial part of your income selling firearms, federally that makes you an FFL, a federal firearms licensee. If you don't have a license, then it's illegal. If you just sell a couple of guns to enhance your personal collection, there's nothing wrong with that.
So in theory, I could apply for this gunsmithing license to produce personal firearms for non-commercial use. Let's say I build, I don't even know, one every couple months and then sell it.
That would, because if your intent is to build them to sell them.
But who's to say what my intent is, right? I know. It's such a
intent, man. That's the thing that'll get you. And like I said, that's why for the average person, it's not worth it.
Right.
I wouldn't pursue getting a gunsmith license just so I could build a couple of ARs. I got enough of them.
Right. Right.
It's not worth it for me, and unfortunately, it's going to disenfranchise a lot of people from getting into the quote home built hobby. And it's not even ARs. Like I said, AKs, people home build AKs, they home build handguns, they build custom 1911s, they build, replicas of, semi-auto replicas of really famous submachine guns and firearms. Some people take demilled parts kits, and rebuild them. I mean, some of the coolest guns I've seen were parts kits builds that were, they were chopped up pieces and then they got rebuilt as semi-auto guns. I mean, one of the coolest ones I've seen was a Chinese Bren that Ian McCullum from Forgotten Weapons has. It was a Bren gun that was rechambered for 7.62x39. It takes a top-mounted AK mag. Right. That thing is cool as hell.
Can't do that, though.
Can't do that in New York. Well, it'd be against the Safe Act anyway, but you can't do that anyway. King Cuomo won't let you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's something special.
It is.
It really
is. Now, getting back to what I said last podcast, though, it doesn't. I'm not giving this law any credit. Don't take this the wrong way. But it doesn't stop you from owning a firearm.
Right.
It doesn't stop you from going to a store and buying that compliant AR or buying that compliant AK.
Right.
It just stops you from doing it at home, which is going to save you a crap load of money. And the one thing I want to get across to people is, even though I vehemently disagree with this law, you still have to have a gun. You still have to go and buy one. the more people that own guns in the state, the more power we the people have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this law. Man, I don't really see
it affects me. All my ARs were home built.
No, I know. I mean, I know it's going to affect a lot of people. I'm saying, like, I don't see this law not passing. I see it probably going to pass.
I see it
because there's really, I mean, you
think about the children,
I mean, you
John.
can
think about the dead children that had nothing to do with ghost guns.
I mean, can someone make an argument that it's infringing on your right because if you buy a firearm elsewhere, it would be, let's say, you can't afford it?
No, it's not infringing. I mean, the only thing I could see of it infringing is on a federal level, because federally you're allowed to build your own guns. That would be the only thing I could see being challenged, is if somebody says, hey, federally, I'm allowed to build my own guns as long as they're compliant to all state, local laws, federal laws, whatever. You're now saying that I can't do this as an individual.
Right.
That would be the only challenge I could see to this law. And then, who's going to take it up?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know?
So just... I kind of wrote down some takeaways here.
Yeah, take me away.
As we discussed, this bill pretty much takes away the ability for people to build guns at home. Right. You know, kind of like a homebrew gun. And that's for non-commercial use, as it says multiple times, and that's how they're distinguishing, you know, people building for their business versus people building, you know, a personal weapon.
Right.
It does lay out that everybody is now a gunsmith.
Yeah.
If you assemble a gun in your house and whatnot. Now, going into the licensing, because it does say, hey, you can license, get a license as a gunsmith and build firearms in your house. But I'm curious, you know, the state does lay out what they will license versus not license,
right,
and what they can deny you for. But I mean, can they deny you? I mean, having a license to build a gun is not the same as being licensed to be able to own a firearm, right?
Right.
So
well,
can they just deny you? If you're allowed to
build the guns, you're allowed to own them. That's just
right. But so what I'm saying is, you know, if you apply for a pistol permit and there's no reason why they, you know, can't give it to you, they have to give it to you right over time. But this is not the same. So at some point, can they just deny everybody just to deny everybody?
They could. I mean, theoretically, they could. If a person doesn't meet, like, good moral character, if, for example, I don't know if, for example, if you get an if you're interested in getting a gunsmith license or an FFL, if you're, let's just say you want to have the gunsmithing license out of your house, if it's not zoned commercially, I mean, it says for personal use, but
I mean,
who knows?
If you're a gunsmith, like, I'm sure there's ordinances within each town and village, like, well, you know, a gunsmith is considered, if you're a gunsmith, you're considered a commercial industry, and
even though it's for non-commercial purposes,
but you know, we're talking about now, like, very, very, very local. I mean, you know, in some towns you can have a business on a street corner, and some you can't because just zoning laws. So now, am I going to be subject to zoning laws because I have that gunsmithing license? You know, is that going to be part of it? You know, is it going to be, well, you don't fit into the, you know, you gave us your address and your location, but that, you know, your address and location
you're within 500 yards of a school,
right? Your location is not zoned for commercial use, and under the law, you know, a gunsmith is now a commercial. You know, it's
even
like,
though it says for non-commercial purposes,
right? It's like all these little nuances that are going to have to really be right, and it's going to be those little nuances where, you know, it will be passed, and not that they really care, but
they'll figure it
you
out
know.
later.
Well, they won't even have to figure it out because it's going to be like, oh, well, you know,
we
put in the bill and said, right, exactly.
I'll give you a little anecdote that's very similar to this. I applied earlier in the year or the end of last year for my CNR 03 FFL, Hero and Relics license.
Mm-hmm.
I was approved by the feds, the ATF, but the ATF Manhattan office called me and said, hey, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but we'll give you the license, no problem. But New York State basically just makes it like a cocktail napkin. It makes it void because the way the law is, there's no carve-out exception for 03 FFLs like there is for 01 or 07 manufacturers in terms of bringing CNR firearms into the state. So all firearms coming into New York State has to go through a dealer through a background check. And 03 is not a dealer in firearms, so therefore you can't bring the gun directly to your house. You have to bring it to an 01 for a background check. Now, from what I was reading online, people are like, oh, I've had my 03 for 15 years, and I do it all the time. And I'm like, that's great. I'm not going to take the advice of somebody on the internet. Just
Right. It's great that you do it because that's how you interpreted the law.
Right.
But
in pre-Safe Act, it was fine.
Right.
But if the lady at the ATF field office in Manhattan told me, hey, by the way, we'll give it to you, but you can't use it,
you might want to go with their recommendation.
Advice.
Yeah, I mean, if they're taking the time to call you,
Right.
it's probably important.
Right.
Because why else are they going to call you? I mean,
Right.
that's a big deal.
Exactly. So I could get this license and I could put it on my wall, but I could never use it to have guns shipped into.
Right.
I mean, I could use it if I go out of state, go to gun shows out of state,
Mm,
but
right.
I can't use it to have firearms shipped to my home
Right.
that are CNR eligible, which is the main reason why. $30 for a 3-year license, that's what the price of one transfer.
Right. Yeah, I mean.
So getting into that, New York State tends to, screw you over in a lot of ways unexpectedly.
Yeah, of course.
So, yeah, gunsmithing licenses, dealer and firearms licenses, a lot of people, they had FFLs operating out of their houses, but now they can't because
Right.
the state doesn't allow it.
So just to kind of bring it all together,
Bring it home.
Just to put everything in the simplest terms as far as this bill, kind of what it lays out. Any person who assembles any parts of a firearm, you're now considered a gunsmith. Every gunsmith must be licensed or it's a C felony. Only a gunsmith can register the gun, and only a gunsmith can stamp serial numbers or identifying marks on a gun that they have built in their own home, right? So that's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's the law.
That's the law, right? So you're a gunsmith now. If you decide, hey, I'm gonna build a gun, okay, you're now a gunsmith,
Right.
And you need to serialize your gun, but you can't do that unless you are a gunsmith,
Right,
and you
it's a
need to register the
circle
gun,
of just
but you
bullshit.
can't do that unless you're a gunsmith,
Yeah.
right? So. And you have to be licensed. So although the law does creates a lot of
avenue.
gunsmiths, you're not a legal gunsmith. You're a felony. You're a felonious gunsmither.
Not a bad
And
name.
that's-
Felonious
the felonious gunsmither. Yeah, I mean, but that's
Good
the
Reddit
law.
handle.
That's the law. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
So now knowing this information, what we ask all of our 5 listeners to do is to get out there and just tell people about it. Tell your family, tell your friends, be like, hey, they're trying to pass this bullshit. I heard the New York Gun Guys talking about it. I didn't
Right.
know about it. They pulled it over us during COVID,
Right.
and now it's passed the Senate.
I'm going to take some time. I'm going to put the bill in the show notes.
Yeah.
Pretty sure, we're still figuring this all out. So I'm gonna try and do that.
To this, so
And
bear with us.
I think I'll also upload it to Instagram, just so people can slide through it and kind of see what we're dealing with, because it's
Yeah, it's
it
a
seems
lot.
like not a lot of people know, and it's
No,
I mean
not
it's
a lot
well
of
on
people
its
do
way
know.
to becoming law.
It's very well on its way. It's
well
about
on its
3/4 of the
way.
way there,
Yeah, I mean that's
which is bullshit.
it's scary. It's scary
It
shit.
is.
So
John, I was going to come in here today talking about how to buy a gun in New York and bring this cool
it just got
M1
a lot harder.
And then the other
do
night,
anything.
I sent him this text about this. I'm like,
yeah, he was like, dude, this is what we have to do it
This is
about.
what
we
we have
to do it about.
have to do about it. This is what we have to do. Get the information out there so everybody can just know what they're dealing with. Tell people, spread the word, and hopefully we can maybe make enough noise. That way people can maybe try and challenge it, maybe try and do something about it, and contact the people that are responsible for this piece of trash legislation.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, Taylor, I mean, do you think, and I know we're going to agree, do you think that this is going to make anybody safer?
No.
Okay, I don't really think.
I think this is
and
gonna
mainly
do
because
jack diddly squat.
I think that it's not going to make anybody safer, just because it's not going to stop anyone from doing.
No.
If you're already milling receivers in your basement and you
Yeah.
have the ability to do that, or 3D print receivers, I mean, listen, you could 3D print a firearm.
Oh, it's amazing. I love watching
Right?
YouTube videos of
I
3D
mean,
printed Glocks.
who's going to
great.
stop doing that? If they, I mean, who's going to stop doing that?
No one.
Right. I don't think this law is going to stop anyone from doing
No
it.
one.
I mean, I would be
And
shocked.
I love watching the videos. I think the YouTube channel is called Control Pew,
Mm-hmm.
CRNTL. It's like the keyboard shortcut Pew.
Right.
They put out videos on 3D printed firearms, homemade firearms, and they have a
Mm-hmm.
YouTube channel as well. I just love watching their videos. It's so great. One featured Dugan Ashley recently, who seems to have gone a little off the deep end. He was the guy in Carnicon. I don't know if you ever saw his videos.
No.
Funny, just great guy. But yeah, John, I think that's pretty much where we're at with this.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it's going to make anybody safer.
No.
Taylor, do you think this is going to stop anyone from actually building guns at home?
No.
I mean, is it going to stop you from building guns at home?
I can't say that on mic.
No, but I mean, you did say it's not worth getting.
Right. It's
I
not
mean,
worth
look,
getting.
at this point, if there's no market for it, so look, Taylor is he's a law-abiding citizen, right?
I am.
He's not going to illegally produce guns in his basement. So he's just one person. Let's say
Right.
there's got to be thousands of people who do make guns
Oh.
just for personal use, right?
A lot of people I know
So,
make AR-15s
right.
for parts kits.
Right. So they're destroying an entire industry.
Exactly.
So even if Taylor did want to do this, I mean, the parts are going to be hard to
And
find.
you know what? I have a lower that I haven't built up yet.
Right.
I got to build it up before this bill passes.
You have to.
I got to make it compliant.
Right. You
You
have
know?
to, or else that's it.
I know, and that's how I
But
built all
you
my
will
ARs.
need to. It does lay out that you will need to register that.
No,
It does.
no.
It
It
does.
already
If it's
has
not,
a serial number. It's not an 80%.
but it's going to have to be registered.
No, only if it doesn't have a serial number.
No, even if it's serial. So only a gunsmith can serialize, and only a gunsmith can register.
Right after the law goes into effect. If it's done before the law, then it's illegally owned.
I don't see that it was grandfathered in.
No,
I
because
see-
then every gun would have to be registered, and that's not what they're getting at. Basically, what they're getting at is anybody who builds a gun after this law is enacted has to go through a gunsmith to do it, and then the gunsmith has to register it with the state police.
So
If
then
it's-
let me ask you this: why put the 6-month provision in?
Because they have to put a grace period in to allow people to bring guns to gunsmiths in order to get it done. Because if they didn't put a grace period in overnight, then literally everyone overnight who had an 80% gun would be a felon. Which is I think they would want to do anyway, but I think they had to put a grace period in. But I don't believe it's the intent to have serialized lowers before the bill passes have to go to a gunsmith, because there's already a record of that firearm existing. It's already done through a background check. They could trace it. What they're more so concerned about is the untraceable, quote, unserialized 80% guns that you can build and have no record of. So if the gun, for example, like if I had a lower and I didn't build it up before this law passed, technically by the letter of the law, because it's an unfinished frame or receiver and I have to assemble the component parts onto it, and I'm not a gunsmith, I would have to give it to a gunsmith, and they would have to then register it with the state police.
So I think in the law
But
it lays out.
Yeah, it's now that I think about it, it's kind of dumb because that gun already has a serial number and it's already so. I don't know if they just have to build it or they have to
Right.
register it only if it has no serial numbers on it.
Because it says here, that if you're in possession of a ghost gun after this is
Right, but a serialized
so-
lower isn't a ghost gun. That's the whole thing. Like an Anderson lower that you got transferred through a 4473, that's not a ghost gun. It's a firearm. So getting back to the
Right.
first provision,
Right.
any firearm, shotgun, rifle that's not finished has to get built by a gunsmith.
right.
So after the law passes, you would have to get it built by a gunsmith, but I don't think they would have to register it.
I think they would, because this bill puts in a registration for
Anything that a
for
gunsmith builds.
quote unquote ghost guns, and that would be because it's not a registered gun within this
Well,
new bill.
Well, you don't
it's-
have to register it. If it's a rifle, you don't have to register it.
If it's home built, you have to register.
If it's home built.
Correct. So if you're in possession of a home built firearm after the 6-month grace period, you are a felon. They can't prove that it wasn't a home built. That it was home built.
I don't think that's the case. I think that they're more so concerned with guns that don't have serial numbers.
I think that's part of it. But
Right.
the way they lay out what a ghost gun is under the law, it's anything that's like an unfinished or
Well, anything that doesn't have a
It's-
serial number, that has to 80%, has no serial number, has no manufacturer's markings
Right.
on it. So that's where this is. But this is
I
exactly
think
why
that,
they do this.
Right, I know, and I think the aim, and I think you're right. I think the aim of it is to
Create this ambiguity.
well,
to
of
create this
course,
registry,
that's
to
what it always. That's
create
what pretty much every law is for.
chaos.
But I think what you're saying about unserialized firearms is true.
Yeah.
So now, if after the 6-month grace period, if you have an unserialized firearm in New York State,
You're a felon.
you're a felon.
Right.
Right. So they give you the grace period because they want you to be able to bring that gun to a gunsmith, a licensed gunsmith. Let me put it that way because remember, we're all gunsmiths now. A licensed gunsmith to be serialized. So you can actually, that's why they give you the 6-month grace period. I mean, but damn, man.
I know.
mean,
Damn.
Jeez. And so, like, basically, if you have an unserialized firearm, which is legal, it's not grandfathered in, you have no choice. You have
Right.
to.
Yeah.
You have no choice under this law. I mean, you obviously have free will, but you know, for this purpose, have no choice. You have to bring it. You have to get it stamped. You have to have it serialized.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Load of bullshit. So,
Well,
I think
I
that's
guess
where
that's
we're
all
at
we
now.
got for today. I mean, it ran a little long today, but
It
I
needed
mean,
to run a little long
damn.
today. I know.
It's a
Damn.
lot.
That's just how crazy the
I
world we
know,
live in today
I
is.
know.
But
Maybe we'll do something a little lighter next time.
yeah, you know what? I'm definitely gonna bring.
for us for podcast number 2 for
Yeah.
episode number 2. This was a heavy topic.
This
man.
really was. And you know what? But it was much needed, and that's
Yeah, I
what I'm
think
getting
so,
at.
yeah,
I
I
think
think so.
next time I'm gonna bring in my one of my M1s and tell the little backstory.
Right.
behind
Yeah.
it.
Kind of what I think what we were kind of discussing is maybe Taylor can bring in one of his
Interesting guns.
relics and
Just talk about it a little
talk
bit.
about it, and maybe we'll post some pictures of it
Yeah.
on the Instagram and kind of say like, hey, this is what we talked about
Right.
today, and maybe they'll help people kind of find the podcast
Right.
a little bit, and we'll pull
And more
pictures
so
of them.
talking about like kind of like what we're gonna in this podcast talk about what we're into. I'm into old CNR guns. I'm into new guns as well, but mostly old
right.
guns is where I get my
Right.
my thing. John's into handguns. John's into
Right.
a lot of the minutia of the laws, and since he's in law enforcement, this is what his
right.
expertise is in. And I think we could bring a lot to the people who listen to this podcast with that. I have some interesting guns. Some more standard run of the mill stuff, but a few of them, there's a really cool story with them
Right.
that I'd love to tell.
Right, I'm looking forward to that because Taylor's got stories and stories about. I go to his house, he tells me stories about every single gun that he has.
Right.
It's crazy. He's like, well, this marking means it came from this portion,
Yeah.
but if you look at this one, it means it was like actually manufactured here, so it traveled and it was actually used. And
Yeah.
it's crazy.
I know.
Like,
And not only guns, but I also collect militaria, bayonets, hats,
well, I think,
inert ordnance.
I think what's cool about the firearms is that
you can use them.
well, I think no, I think like you are collecting firearms, which is really cool, but every single firearm that you collect, you're also collecting a story.
Yeah, for sure.
You're
and some of
collecting
them don't have a
story,
but
and a story that if you didn't have it, might not be told.
right.
So
Some of them don't have a visible story, but that they probably been through some shit. Or some of them have a story
Right.
about how I bought them.
Right.
What my time period in my life was like, or
Right.
how I found this gun at a pawn shop, or what it got into, like what got me into it.
right.
So there's always a story, and actually, it's funny. I joke with my wife all the time. I have the most things from North Korea, I think, out of anybody I know. I just got a stack
More
of
than North Korea.
Yeah, I just got a stack of North Korean money last night.
I saw that. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, so I actually have a flag coming from Russia, North Korean flag, and I actually have a couple of military hats coming from China, North Korean military hats.
And that's just the
Right.
part
So
of
I could bring
history
in
that
some
you're
bayonets
interested
and some
in,
cool stuff to talk about as well,
Right,
because
so-
it kind of goes in all together. But John, to episode number 3,
Two.
it's going to be
well,
we're
2,
going
3.
to episode number
Got you.
3,
Right.
so we're moving right along here. But I had a lot of fun talking about this today, and I'm glad we got the information.
Yeah, I'm
out.
glad we had the opportunity. Like I said, it ran a little long, but it had to.
It had to be said. So, John, next time, John and Taylor, New York Gun Guys, follow us on Instagram.
Please share it.
Share it.
If this helped you at all, let us know.
Right. Send us an
we
email,
don't know-
info at
listen.
NYGunGuys.com.
Yeah, we don't know what we're doing.
This is normally what we would do when we just hang out anyway.
Right, yeah, we shoot the shit about that. This is something we definitely would be talking about.
Right.
So. All right, I know Taylor needs to run, so we'll...
Yeah, man. Catch y'all next time.
All right, take it easy. Thanks. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to today's episode at the NY Gun Guys podcast. We do release a new episode every Monday. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at NYGunGuys. Please give us a like, a follow, and a share. If you have any feedback or a suggestion for a future episode, definitely send us an email at info@nygunguys.com. We'll see you next time. Be safe out there.